But the terror it inspired lived on, because every military engineer in the Mediterranean now knew what was possible. And speaking of terror, the next ram on our list was small enough to be carried by 4 men. Yet it achieved something the Helepolis never did. It actually conquered its target. Part 3. The Roman Testudo Ram. The Romans looked at massive siege towers like the Helepolis and thought, too complicated. Roman military doctrine was all about efficiency, speed, and mass production. So they invented something radically different, a battering ram that could be deployed in hours, not months, and still bring down any gate in the empire. Meet the Testudo Ram, and yes, it's named after the famous Roman turtle formation. But this wasn't just soldiers with shields. This was a dedicated mobile shelter, shaped like a tortoise shell, with a suspended ram underneath. The entire structure was maybe 15 feet long, covered in fresh hides, and so lightweight that a cohort could carry the pieces and assemble it on site. But don't let the simplicity fool you. This ram was devastatingly effective because the Romans understood something crucial. Gates were always the weakest point. You didn't need a 9-story tower to punch through wood and bronze. You just needed focused, relentless force applied to the right spot. Here's how it worked in practice. A unit would approach under shield cover, assemble the testudo frame, drape it with water-soaked hides, and then 6 to 8 men would get inside with the ram. The shelter protected them from arrows, stones, and burning pitch while they worked. The ram itself was typically an oak log with an iron tip, and it hung from chains so it could be swung rhythmically. Pull back, release, strike. Pull back, release, strike. The rhythm was everything. Roman soldiers trained for this specifically, learning to time their swings so each strike built on the previous one's momentum. It created a vibration pattern that loosened hinges, fractured wood grain, and eventually splintered the gates entirely. Historical accounts describe gates exploding inward after just an hour of sustained ramming. The Roman technique was that efficient. But here's what made the Roman version truly revolutionary. They standardized it. Every legion knew how to build one. Every soldier knew how to operate one. This meant Rome could conduct multiple sieges simultaneously across their vast empire, each one using the same proven techniques. It was siege warfare by spreadsheet, systematic, repeatable, unstoppable. And the psychological impact was just as important. Imagine you're a Celtic chieftain, safe behind your hill fort's wooden palisade. Then you see Roman legions arrive, and within hours, not days, hours, they've assembled these strange turtle-shaped shelters and are already pounding at your gates. The speed alone was terrifying. You barely had time to prepare defenses before they were breaching your walls. The Romans used these rams everywhere, from Britain to Judea, from Gaul to North Africa. At the siege of Jerusalem in 70 AD, Josephus describes multiple testudo rams operating simultaneously, pounding different sections of the city walls in a coordinated assault. The defenders dropped massive stones, poured boiling oil, even sent out flaming arrows by the thousands. The Romans just assembled new testudos and kept going. But there was one culture that saw the Roman ram and thought, we can do better. And what they created would become the most feared siege weapon in the Eastern world. But before moving on, I would like to ask you for something. If you like these documentaries and want to support me, please consider subscribing. It's free. Part 4. The Chinese Suspended Ram. While Rome was perfecting efficiency in the West, ancient China was taking battering ram technology in a completely different direction, one focused on sheer mechanical advantage. During the Warring States period, Chinese engineers developed something that wouldn't be matched in Europe for over 1,000 years. The suspended pendulum ram. Picture a massive wooden frame, almost like a gallows, standing 30 feet tall. Hanging from the crossbeam by thick hemp ropes is a log that weighs over 2 tons, capped with a bronze head shaped like a dragon's mouth. This isn't swung by men. It's operated by a counterweight system that gives it exponentially more force than any human-powered ram could achieve. Here's the genius. The log hangs naturally at rest, like a pendulum. To operate it, teams of soldiers pull it backward using ropes attached to the rear, cranking it up at an angle. Then they release. Gravity does the rest. The ram swings forward with such force that eyewitness accounts describe it passing through wooden gates as if they were paper and leaving stone doors shattered to powder. But the Chinese took it even further. They discovered that if you time the releases correctly, you can build up a resonance frequency. Each swing amplifies the previous one, creating vibrations that propagate through the entire gate structure. It's the same principle that brings down bridges in earthquakes. Within minutes of sustained strikes, even massive bronze-reinforced gates would begin to warp and buckle, their hinges tearing from stone mountings. And the frame itself was mobile. It was mounted on wheels and could be repositioned quickly. But here's the brilliant part. The frame was tall enough that it could strike not just gates, but also the tops of walls. Chinese engineers realized that walls weren't uniformly strong. The crenellations, the top sections where defenders stood, were actually more vulnerable than the base. So they'd position these suspended rams to strike high, collapsing wall sections and creating breaches that infantry could pour through. Historical texts from the period describe sieges where multiple suspended rams operated in sequence, creating a rhythmic bombardment that never stopped. One ram would strike while another was being pulled back. Then another would release while the first was being repositioned. The constant pounding was psychological torture. Defenders couldn't predict the next strike, couldn't time their countermeasures, couldn't rest. But the most terrifying version of this weapon appeared during the Three Kingdoms period, around 200 AD. Engineers serving the warlord Cao Cao developed what they called the Thunder Ram, a suspended ram fitted with an explosive charge in its bronze head. Yes, you read that right. Early gunpowder-based incendiaries were packed into the ram's tip, so when it struck, it didn't just impact, it exploded. Imagine being inside a city when that hits your gate. The physical strike alone is devastating, but then there's a flash, a deafening blast, and suddenly the gate isn't just broken. It's on fire, splinters flying in every direction, defenders blown backward from the shockwave. No city in China could withstand it. The Thunder Ram turned sieges that should have lasted months into operations completed in days. But as ingenious as the Chinese suspended ram was, there was one culture that looked at all these designs and thought, what if we made it bigger? And what they created would require an engineering solution that sounds impossible. Part 5. The Byzantine Traction Trebuchet Ram. By the medieval period, the Byzantine Empire faced a unique problem. Their enemies had learned from centuries of siege warfare. City walls were now 3 meters thick, gates were reinforced with multiple layers of iron banding, and defenders had gotten very good at destroying rams before they could do serious damage. So Byzantine engineers did something audacious. They combined 2 siege weapons into one. They mounted a battering ram on a traction trebuchet base. Let that sink in for a moment. A trebuchet is a catapult that uses human power. Teams of men pulling ropes to fling projectiles. Now imagine that same mechanism, but instead of throwing rocks, it's swinging a massive ram forward with the force of a trebuchet release. The physics alone are staggering. Here's how it worked. The ram, typically a bronze-headed beam weighing around 1,500 pounds, was attached to the long arm of a trebuchet frame. Dozens of soldiers would pull ropes attached to the short arm, yanking it down and causing the long arm, with the ram, to whip forward at incredible velocity. The ram would strike with such force that Byzantine historians claim it could breach double-layer gates in a single hit. But the engineering challenge was immense. Traditional rams swing slowly, building momentum gradually. A trebuchet-powered ram strikes once, fast and hard. This meant the frame had to withstand enormous stress without shattering. Byzantine engineers solved this by using a shock absorption system, layers of rope and leather padding that compressed on impact, dissipating the force that would otherwise tear the frame apart. And they added something even more clever. After the ram struck, the recoil would naturally pull it backward, and the soldiers would immediately pull the ropes again, creating a rapid-fire effect. Historical accounts from Arab chroniclers describe these rams striking like the heartbeat of a giant, 3 or 4 impacts per minute. Compare that to traditional rams, which struck maybe once every 10 to 15 seconds. The psychological impact was devastating. Defenders couldn't repair damage between strikes. By the time they organized a response, the ram had hit again. And again. And again. Byzantine siege tactics relied on this relentless pace, using the trebuchet ram to create breaches while regular catapults bombarded the walls with stones and fire pots, overwhelming the defense. But here's where it gets really interesting. the Byzantines realized the ram didn't always have to strike the gate directly. Sometimes they'd aim it at the wall right next to the gate, where the stone met the gate frame. These corners were structural weak points, and the trebuchet's force was enough to crack the masonry, causing the entire gate section to collapse inward, frame and all. At the siege of Chandax in 960 AD, Byzantine forces used multiple trebuchet rams to bring down sections of wall that had stood for 300 years. The Arab defenders tried everything, sallying out to destroy the machines, shooting fire arrows, even undermining the ground beneath them. Nothing worked. The Byzantines protected their trebuchet rams with mobile wooden barriers and kept up the bombardment day and night until the walls crumbled. But as dominant as the Byzantines were with this design, there was one limitation they could never overcome: size. The trebuchet ram required massive crews and enormous amounts of space to operate. In tight sieges or mountain fortresses, it was useless. That's where our next ram comes in. A design so compact and portable it could be carried up mountain paths and assembled in caves. Part 6. The Medieval Boar Ram. Castle designers in medieval Europe thought they'd finally solved the gate problem. They built them thick, sometimes 2 meters of solid oak, reinforced with iron bands, set into stone frames and backed with multiple portcullises. These weren't just doors. They were fortifications in their own right. A traditional battering ram could pound on them for days and barely make a dent. So medieval engineers invented the boar ram, and it changed everything. Unlike traditional rams that strike flat surfaces, the boar ram had a narrow, drill-like iron head that was designed to punch through wood rather than shatter it. Think of it like the difference between hitting a door with a sledgehammer versus stabbing it with a spear. Same force, but focused into a point so small that the wood couldn't distribute the pressure. Here's the crucial innovation. The head wasn't just pointed, it was augured, like a giant drill bit. As the ram struck repeatedly, it would twist slightly with each impact, literally boring into the wood grain. The iron head had spiral ridges that caught the wood fibers and ripped them apart from the inside. After just a dozen strikes, it would create a hole clean through the gate, maybe 6 inches wide. And that's when things got medieval, in every sense of the word. Once the boar created that initial hole, soldiers would widen it with axes and pry bars, or they'd simply stick lances and swords through and start stabbing whoever was on the other side. The psychological effect was horrifying. Defenders suddenly weren't safe even behind closed gates. They could see the iron point emerging through their side of the door, splinters flying inward, the hole getting wider with each strike. But the boar ram's real strength was its size. It was small, maybe 12 feet long, operated by just 4 to 6 men. This meant it could be used in places where traditional rams were impossible. Castles built on cliff sides, fortresses with narrow approaches, even cave entrances could be breached with a boar ram. Crusaders used them extensively in the Holy Land, where many fortifications were carved into rock faces with minimal space for large siege equipment. At the Siege of Acre in 1191, Richard the Lionheart's forces used multiple boar rams simultaneously, punching holes through the city's gates like a sewing machine while larger rams struck nearby sections. The defenders tried filling the holes with stones and mortar, but the boar rams would just punch through the repairs. Arab historians described the gate looking like Swiss cheese after days of this treatment, until it finally collapsed inward completely. And here's something truly diabolical. Medieval engineers discovered they could heat the boar ram's iron head in a nearby forge, then strike while it was red hot. The burning metal would char the wood, making it brittle and easier to penetrate. Imagine a weapon so devastating that entire cities surrendered at the mere sight of it being assembled outside their walls. A machine that could reduce gates 6 feet thick to splinters in hours, yet was built from nothing more than logs and rope. This was the battering ram, and the terror it inspired was so profound that defenders would often negotiate surrender rather than face its relentless pounding. But the world of ancient siege warfare holds far more than simple tree trunks swung against doors. Buried deep in the annals of military history lie engineering marvels so sophisticated they rivaled modern machinery. Rams fitted with bronze heads sharper than guillotine blades. Mobile fortresses on wheels that sheltered hundreds of soldiers while they worked. Designs so deadly they could punch through stone walls 3 meters thick, leaving nothing but rubble and broken defenders in their wake. These machines were steeped in mystery. their construction techniques jealously guarded by military engineers who passed their knowledge down through generations like sacred texts. The screaming metal heads carved into their tips weren't just decorative. They were psychological weapons designed to break the spirit before breaking the gate. And the mightiest empires of the ancient world, from Rome to Assyria to China, rose and fell on the backs of these wooden behemoths. Today, we'll uncover 7 of the most devastating battering rams ever constructed, each one more ingenious than the last. And the first one on our list was so feared that defenders would set their own gates ablaze rather than let it touch them. Part 1. The Assyrian Siege Engine. The Assyrian Empire didn't just conquer, it obliterated. And at the heart of their military dominance was a battering ram so advanced it wouldn't be matched for centuries. Picture this. The year is 865 BC, and you're standing on the walls of a fortified city in ancient Mesopotamia. On the horizon, you see them approaching. Massive wooden towers rolling toward you on 6 wheels, each one 3 stories tall and bristling with arches. But it's what's jutting from the front that makes your blood run cold. A bronze ram's head, gleaming in the desert sun, mounted on a massive log suspended by chains inside the tower. This isn't just a ram, it's a complete military system. Here's what made it revolutionary. The Assyrians understood something other civilizations hadn't grasped yet: protection. Their rams operated from inside armored towers covered in wet hides that couldn't be burned. While soldiers swung the ram, archers on upper platforms provided covering fire, picking off defenders who tried to drop stones or burning pitch. The whole structure moved on wheels reinforced with metal bands, and teams of oxen could position it precisely where the wall was weakest. But here's the truly terrifying part. The ram itself was suspended by chains, not ropes. This meant it could swing with enormous momentum, building speed with each backward pull before crashing forward. The bronze head weighed over 200 pounds and was shaped like a spear point, designed to concentrate all that force into a single devastating impact point. And it worked. Archaeological evidence from Assyrian siege sites shows gates splintered into fragments, hinges ripped clean from stone. The Assyrians documented their conquests on palace walls, and these relief carvings show defenders in absolute panic as these machines approached. Some cities held out for months, but once the ram touched the gate, it was only a matter of time. The impact sound alone was psychological warfare, a thunderous boom that echoed through the city, each strike a countdown to doom. Defenders tried everything, dropping massive stones, pouring burning oil, even sending out suicide squads to set the towers ablaze. Nothing worked. The wet hides extinguished flames, the tower's height kept the stones from reaching the ram itself, and the archers cut down anyone who got close. But what made this machine even more ingenious was something the Assyrians discovered through trial and error, something that would change siege warfare forever. And it's connected to our next ram in a way you wouldn't expect. Part 2. The Helepolis, the City Taker. Fast forward 600 years to the island of Rhodes, and you'll witness the largest battering ram ever constructed in ancient history. The Helepolis, or City Taker, wasn't just a ram. It was a moving fortress that stood 9 stories tall and weighed over 160 tons. To put that in perspective, it was as tall as a modern apartment building and heavier than 100 cars. But here's where it gets insane. This monster was built by Demetrius I of Macedon during the Siege of Rhodes in 305 BC, and it required 3,400 men just to move it. The ram itself, suspended inside the lowest level, was a single bronze-capped beam that measured 55 feet long and weighed nearly 4 tons. When it swung, the ground shook. The engineering was staggering. The tower rolled on 8 massive wheels, each reinforced with iron plates. The exterior was covered in iron sheets to prevent fire, and inside, it housed multiple levels of catapults, bolt throwers, and hundreds of soldiers. Water reservoirs on the upper floors could douse any flames that did catch. This wasn't just a ram, it was a self-contained army. And when it struck the walls of Rhodes, eyewitness accounts describe stone blocks exploding inward, mortar dust filling the air like fog. The defenders had never seen anything like it. They tried undermining it with tunnels, but Demetrius had engineers who detected the digging and redirected the tower. They shot fire arrows by the thousands. The iron plates deflected them. They even sent out their entire garrison in a desperate nighttime assault to burn it. but the guards repelled them. Here's the truly brilliant part. The ram didn't just swing back and forth. It was mounted on a sophisticated pulley system that allowed the crew to vary the strike angle mid-operation. If the defenders reinforced one section of wall, the operators could adjust and target a different spot without repositioning the entire tower. It was adaptive siege warfare, something that wouldn't be seen again until the medieval period. But then something unexpected happened. After months of relentless pounding, with the walls crumbling and roads on the brink of collapse, the siege suddenly ended. Not because the ram failed, but because politics intervened. Ptolemy of Egypt brokered a peace deal, and Demetrius withdrew. The Rhodians were so relieved they melted down the abandoned Heliopolis and used the bronze to build the Colossus of Rhodes, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Think about that. The metal from history's most fearsome battering ram became a statue celebrating freedom. Some accounts describe smoke pouring from the holes, defenders choking on the fumes while trying to reinforce the gate from the inside. It was siege warfare meets psychological torture. But the boar ram had one weakness. It required getting very close to the gate, within range of boiling oil, stones, and everything else defenders could drop. So engineers developed mobile sheds called cats or sows, wooden shelters on wheels that the ram operators could work under. These were covered in wet hides, just like ancient designs, creating a kind of armored workspace right against the castle gate. Still, it was dangerous work. Chronicles from medieval sieges describe ram operators as elite troops who received extra pay and special honors, because everyone knew the mortality rate was brutal. You were the first target, working inches from the enemy, under constant bombardment. But the rewards were worth it. Ram crews who successfully breached a gate often got first pick of the plunder. Now, as devastating as the boar ram was against wooden gates, there was one final evolution of battering ram technology that combined every lesson learned across 2,000 years of siege warfare. And it was designed specifically to solve an impossible problem. How do you breach a gate when the enemy has prepared for every type of ram ever invented? Part 7. The Ottoman multi-stage ram. By the 15th century, fortress designers had gotten very sophisticated. They knew about suspended rams, boar rams, trebuchet rams, and every other variation ever invented. So they built gates that could theoretically withstand them all. Multiple layers, different materials, counterweight systems that made them nearly impossible to knock off their hinges. The gates of Constantinople were considered impregnable. And they were right, until the Ottomans showed up with something nobody had ever seen before. The Ottoman multi-stage ram wasn't a single weapon, it was a system. Stage 1 was a traditional heavy ram designed to create initial cracks and stress fractures. Stage 2 was a bore-style ram that exploited those fractures, drilling through the weakened sections. And Stage 3, this is where it gets brilliant, was a specialized ram with a hooked head designed to catch the interior bracing and literally rip the gate apart from the inside. Think about the coordination required. 3 different ram crews, working in sequence, each with a specific job. The heavy ram would strike until the gate began to splinter. Then it would withdraw, and the boar ram would move in, punching holes through the weakened wood. Finally, once there were gaps large enough, the hooked ram would strike, its curved iron head catching interior crossbeams and tearing them free with each backward pull. It was surgical, methodical, unstoppable. The Ottomans used this system at the Siege of Constantinople in 1453, and the results were devastating. The Great Theodosian Walls, which had protected the city for over 1,000 years, had gates that were engineering marvels, triple-layered, reinforced with bronze, backed by portcullises. But the multi-stage rams broke through them in days. But here's what really made this system revolutionary: mobility. Each ram was relatively lightweight and operated independently. If defenders concentrated their fire on one ram, the other 2 could continue working. If one ram was damaged or destroyed, the others adapted. It was decentralized siege warfare, the Ottoman answer to castles that had adapted to every previous ram design. And they added one more innovation that showed just how far ram technology had come: sound tactics. Ottoman engineers realized that different materials make different sounds when they're about to fail. Wood cracks and groans, stone grinds and pops, metal rings and shrieks. So they trained specialists to listen to the gates while the rams were striking, identifying the exact moment when the structure was ready to collapse. Then they'd pull back the rams, bring up infantry, and breach the moment it fell, minimizing casualties and maximizing speed. At Constantinople, this technique allowed them to breach the gate of St. Romanus faster than the defenders could organize a counterassault. The rams had done their work so efficiently that Byzantine forces were still scrambling to reinforce when Ottoman troops were already pouring through the breach. Historical accounts describe the final moments of the gate. The heavy ram had created deep fractures running the entire height. The bore ram had punched through 3 separate sections, creating holes you could see through. And then the hooked ram caught an interior crossbeam, and when the crew pulled back, the entire gate structure twisted, hinges screaming, bronze bands snapping like rope. It didn't just open, it collapsed, taking part of the surrounding wall with it. The fall of Constantinople marked the end of the Byzantine Empire, but it also marked the end of an era for battering rams themselves. Within decades, gunpowder artillery would make them obsolete. Cannons could do in hours what rams took days to accomplish. But for over 2 millennia, from Assyrian bronze heads to Ottoman multistage systems, the battering ram was the ultimate city killer, a weapon that turned the strongest defense into nothing more than kindling and rubble. These 7 rams represent 2,500 years of military engineering evolution, from simple logs to sophisticated mechanical systems. Each one solved a specific problem. Each one changed siege warfare forever. And together, they rewrote the rules of medieval combat, proving that no wall, no gate, no fortress was ever truly impregnable. It just hadn't met the right ram yet. If you enjoyed this journey through history's most devastating siege weapons, consider subscribing for more deep dives into the weapons and tactics that shaped our world.